बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, namaskar, and a very good evening to all of you, particularly distinguished members of the bar and members of civil society who I understand have traveled great distances to be here in Colombo today, apart from members of the local fraternity who are present here. I also commence by thanking my very good friend, Upul Jayasuriya, for extending this invitation and for providing me an opportunity to be back amongst friends and distinguished colleagues in Sri Lanka. I want to begin by just acknowledging, as Prashant Kumar did a short while ago, the immense respect which the global community has for lawyers in Sri Lanka. I think the role of the bar as an instrument of hope, of excellence, of upholding core values is exemplified by your community here in Sri Lanka. You have been steadfast, you have been very strong and clear-headed, and while times have gone, there's always ups and downs in terms of the tides of fortune as far as democracy is concerned, very, very difficult times insofar as political stability is concerned. But I think the role of the bar in Sri Lanka has been really quite exemplary in upholding the rule of law, in ensuring that core values of human spirit are always front and center, and in not dropping the ball even when times were very difficult. So my tremendous compliments to each one of you for being a very, very proud and distinguished member of a bar which all of us from across the world really look up to. I might add that I presently serve as president of LAWASIA, an organization which was formed or conceived in the year 1964, and believe it or not, it was at a United Nations Conference on Human Rights which was being held in Kabul. That's when the idea of an organization for the Asia Pacific amongst lawyers came about. We were formed in 1966, and during this journey we've had many distinguished members of the Sri Lankan bar who served in various capacities. The first president was Dr. H.W. Jayawardene, in 1979 to 1981 from Sri Lanka. He was the 5th president of LAWASIA. And so there's been a strong connection between the local bar and the international legal community. And this bridge works both ways. We benefit tremendously from your experience, from your clarity, from your contributions. Upul has served on the LAWASIA Executive Committee for several years and has contributed richly to the organization. My other friend, Sunil Abhayratne, is also over here, and he continues to contribute very handsomely, and I acknowledge their thanks. So I see a great opportunity also for further collaborations and assistance. Assistance, of course, comes in many ways. Assistance comes because the energy of the Sri Lankan bar is spread across global jurisdictions by participation from Sri Lankan lawyers elsewhere, and it flows back in a way. When some of us come across here, we exchange ideas, etc. So my salute to the Sri Lankan bar before I come to sharing a few thoughts on the topic of the day. I have also had the advantage, and I commend the team which has put together very carefully proposals for reforming the legal framework for system change. I can see a large amount of effort has gone in. Language and words have been carefully selected, and lots of boxes have been ticked in terms of what has been mentioned as a very crucial period in the development and evolution of Sri Lanka as a democracy and a space for all freedom-loving peoples. I would just make 3 or 4 points in the opening. The first point which I wish to make is, I think that as far as constitutions are concerned, they must endure. I think endurance in a constitution itself is a basic and a fundamental value. So when we revisit constitutions, and sometimes it is necessary to do so, in the Indian context, we have crossed the 100, we've crossed the century number insofar as our constitutional amendments are concerned. So the Constitution of India is a very long document. You've got a score of amendments already, and that at a certain level indicates flexibility. I don't for a moment suggest that you shouldn't revisit the Constitution. If times are necessary, we must amend and alter as our experiences indicate. But please keep in mind that constitutions are really built to endure. And sometimes the changes which we introduce in them probably help them to endure. The second thing which struck me as I was listening to speaker after speaker is what I saw as the great duty which is being discharged by each one of you. And I commend you on that. And I saw two duties. The first was the duty to engage. And the second is the most important duty, I think, in any democracy, which is the duty to remain optimistic. I think we cannot, even when times become dark, as was mentioned, probably there's a global trend towards authoritarianism and electoral autocracies. But I think as citizens of a democracy, we are all duty-bound to remain optimistic. So it's a bit like the paintings of Seneca Senanayake, bright, colorful, attractive, and even though at times it might feel dark and gloomy, as some of the speakers also indicated, we have to be committed to optimism. And we have to be committed to engage. And I see this enormous effort which has been put in as part of that duty of citizens to engage, to enlighten, to inform the public, to think through various problems and challenges which face us. The other point is, and this was mentioned as well, is with regard to institutions. And I think institution building is really the focus of all civil society organizations such as the bar associations in this country and beyond. So I remember I was asked, or rather I was told once as to what an institution is. I was a little confused. What is an institution? Everybody talks about institution buildings, but what really is an institution? And the answer I was told was the State Bank of India. So I said, why is the State Bank of India regarded as an institution and not others? So the person who was narrating this and who gave the description, I thought was very apt. He said that even if you put a monkey at the top of the State Bank of India, it will still function. So that's a pretty good test for an institution. I mean, regardless of the individual who occupies it or temporarily occupies it, the system works. And therefore, I think new designs must be towards creating new institutions, but new institutions are such which are not individual dependent. Which takes me to the next point on checks and balances. And I thought that the paper which is produced of proposals on reforming the legal framework has some excellent checks and balances in place and which are now sought to be introduced. I think those would be very useful. In particular, as far as independence of the judiciary is concerned, I think it's very, very commendable what has been put in, giving the assurance not just of tenure to judges, but also as far as income and remuneration post-retirement is concerned. I think if a judge is assured in that regard, as far as financials are concerned, then that is of immense help in maintaining his independence when he or she is in office. But there is one slight note of caution on the basis of the Indian experience which I will share, because I did notice a reference to it. In India, we find that if you see the laws for the last 20 or 30 years, there is an enormous dependence on judges, and particularly retired judges. And that has had a very unfortunate impact as far as our judiciary and our independence of the judiciary is concerned. How is that? So the judges are appointed in an independent manner. They are ostensibly independent, but it's a human tendency. What will happen to me after I retire, after I reach the age of superannuation? And so I notice as a practitioner a not very healthy trend where you have, subconsciously perhaps, judges competing for situations or for post-retirement posts. So, I mean, nobody will acknowledge it. They will say that, no, we are excellent judges. We are not really looking at these kind of, small posts. But I think our experience, at least in India, is that this is not a very healthy situation. So maybe you should consider revisiting that by having an assured financial package for judges post-retirement, but not linking it up, or in no manner, in fact, having post-retirement positions for your higher judiciary and constitutional judges. The other point I wish to make, because there seems to be a serious debate over here on the parliamentary system, or indeed a presidential system. Now, we've had a parliamentary system in India right from the very start, and our Supreme Court has held that that form of governance and representation is part of our basic structure. You can't really amend it even by a constitutional amendment. And here I should just mention that at least the experience over 7+ decades in India has been that when you have governments which are coalition, which are not enjoying as much of a majority, wafer thin, which are dependent on other forms of support, you inevitably have a system which engages in much more bargaining, in much more transactions with others as in from across the aisle. But when you have a very strong government, as we have, for example, at the present moment, there is really not much difference between a parliamentary system and a presidential system. Because what tends to happen with large parliamentary majorities is that you virtually have a prime minister's office which runs the show. So the final point, therefore, which I will make is that the checks and balances which you put in are absolutely crucial. An expression that I heard repeatedly from earlier speakers was impunity. And there I find a very commendable suggestion made in the draft suggestions on prosecutorial independence and prosecutorial, obviously, financing, by which you have a prosecutor's office which doesn't yield to pressures, or yields at least less to pressures in theory. We're all sort of human beings, and so that we can't completely insulate this process. The Indian Supreme Court now, it's been more than 15 years, has been trying police reforms to the judicial system. But there is tremendous resistance to police reforms. We have now a judgment of the Supreme Court of India which says that you have to have CCTV cameras in all your police stations, and particularly in areas, so that there is no, question of torture, etc., which takes place, and abuse, because these are, after all, your guardians of law. Even for that simple direction, much less the larger police reforms, it's been the executive has been very cutting across party lines, has been very reluctant to implement those. So I thank you all for your time, and I commend you on this exercise of rethinking new reforms, new changes, which will make Sri Lanka a much stronger and more vibrant society. Thank you very much.